When you first start gardening, you've probably dug some of this up in your yard and called it dirt, only for someone slightly more experienced to maybe smugly say, actually, that's soil. And then you might have gone to the nursery and tried to shop for soil and been confused by all the different types that are available. So in today's video, we're gonna walk through what dirt is, what soil is, and what are all the different types of soil you might find at a nursery, and which ones make the most sense to buy for a particular use case. If you're new here, I'm Kevin, and I've been growing my own food for over 12 years, and making soil buying mistakes set me back a couple years of progress when I first started gardening. So I'm gonna help you prevent that in today's video, which is sponsored by our friends at Fox Farm. First, let's start off with the difference between soil and dirt. They are not synonymous with one another, believe it or not. So what I have here is basically a chunk of dirt. It's topsoil that came out of a different part of my garden that is more or less lifeless. It's full of clay, sand, silt particles, rocks, etc. There's no worms in here. There's probably a little bit of bacteria and fungi, but not very much at all. So it's closer to dirt than anything else. And then of course, right here in my garden, I have quite a bit of soil. And the difference, of course, there's a coloration difference, there's a texture difference, but most of the difference is actually invisible to the naked eye, and it would be the billions and billions of microorganisms, microbes, bacteria, the many miles of fungal networks that exist within this trowel right here. In fact, even within a tablespoon of soil, you have billions of different organisms that are interacting. And so the best way to think about it is soil is dirt plus life. Then you have soil, and what's happening there is all of those different organisms, the bacteria, are breaking down potentially some of the mineral content in the soil, releasing some of that into elemental forms of macro and micronutrients. You also have insects that are breaking down larger particles of organic matter. You have earthworms cycling through, as well as fungal colonies that are helping to transport water and nutrients into plant roots. And so that's the biggest difference. But then you get to the nursery and it seems like things get turned on their head yet again. So you roll up to the nursery all excited, you head to the back where the pallets of soil are, and you look at the names on the bags and you see potting soil, raised bed soil, topsoil, garden soil, all these different names that all have the word soil in them. And you just learned that soil is dirt plus life. So you think to yourself, any of these bags should be fine. Maybe I grab the cheapest bag, I'll be good to go. And the truth is, you will have bad results in your garden if you make that choice. Here's what to know. We'll start out with the biggest category, which would be potting soils. All of these are designed primarily for things to be grown in containers, whether it's a container like this that's growing this beautiful Genovese basil, or maybe even something like a raised bed, which is really just a large container. So right here I have 3 different potting soils from the same brand. Fox Farm, who's the sponsor of the video, thank you to them. We love their soils. We've been using them for many years now here at Epic Gardening. So what you have here is, let's say, the most basic one. All potting mixes or soils have to do 3 things. They have to provide some nutrition to the plant so the plant can actually grow. They have to provide water and hold on to enough water so that the plant's roots don't dry out and die. But they also have to have enough oxygen and aeration in the soil so that the plant's roots don't drown in that water. So aeration, retention of water, and nutrition. And that's what a potting soil is really designed to do. So the truth about a lot of these potting soils is that they're technically soil-less in the sense that they don't have a lot of mineral content. Sometimes, depends on the mix. Over here we have one called Happy Frog. This one has peat moss, forest products, fertilizer, etc. in it. There's not like sand or silt or clay particles in there. Then you've got ocean forest, which actually does have some sandy loam. So there's some actual mineral content in this mix, which makes it closer to a living soil. All of these, of course, have nutrition and organic matter incorporated inside. And then you have this one over here called Strawberry Fields, which is designed for fruiting plants. Things like, of course, strawberries, but maybe even peppers or something like a tomato. And what they've done there is put in more organic matter that's higher in potassium and phosphorus, which are used to produce the fruiting parts of plants more often. So even within a potting soil, which is just one of the types of soils that exist, you have different options for different use cases in your garden. The next thing you may see as you rock up to the nursery is something called topsoil, and it's usually in smaller bags, but it's quite heavy, and there's a reason for that. Right here in my garden, this is kind of a back patch with a bunch of weeds and stuff. That's mostly all that I could grow in this area because this is my topsoil. You can tell the color's a lot lighter. It's mostly mineral content, sand, silt, or clay particles, not a lot of life, not a lot of water retention, not a lot of aeration. Oftentimes you can buy this as like fill dirt, and most of the time it's used for landscaping or structure, like filling a hole or creating a berm or making a hill or filling a retaining wall, something like that, it is not very good for gardening. So I would never really buy topsoil for the purpose of gardening unless you amend it to create something called garden soil, which you'll also find at the nursery. And to me, garden soil is the #1 most confusingly named product you can find at a nursery, because basically what it is topsoil plus some kind of compost products. Maybe there's some forest products in there, like some barks and stuff, plus broken down organic matter that is designed to be put in the ground, not in a container, not in a raised bed. So I would be taking this garden soil here and I would be kind of digging out a hole or digging out a bed and amending in to my existing soil so that that soil is actually able to grow plants in a meaningful way. The reason garden soil can be confusing is because when you think of the word garden, you don't think just in the ground, right? Of course you think raised beds, pots, but that's what potting mixes are made for, the ones we just talked about. They're specially formulated to hold on to a little more water. Maybe they have a little more inherent nutrition because you're growing in a confined space in that pot. Garden soil, you really don't want to be putting into a raised bed or a container. There's a lot of mineral content in it. Those clay particles can fall down to the bottom eventually, compacting the mix, making it anoxic or hard for oxygen to get through that soil mix, as well as just it gets really heavy and it can distort the containers that you're in. It's not a great choice, but it's very confusing. So for this reason, unless you're creating a specialty mix and you really know what you're doing, I tend to stay away from garden soils unless I'm growing in the ground. Now we get to seed starting mix, which is probably the most self-explanatory one. What you have here is a mixture that is specifically designed just for the seed starting process. And what that means is it's smaller. The particle size of everything in the mixture is a lot smaller, whether it be perlite pieces or little bits of bark, etc. It is all much smaller. It's sort of pre-sifted is one way to think about it. Now, there's a big difference in philosophy in some seed starting mixes. I, for the last maybe 10 years of my gardening journey or so, have been of the mind that you do not need to sterilize your seed starting mix. That's usually recommended by some gardeners because of the diseases that can crop up in the seed starting process. There's one called damping off that can basically make a seedling fall over like this and die. But to me, I'm gonna be planting all my seedlings into a living system, into my garden where it's full of living soil, and I really want my seedlings to be ready for that. I don't really think it needs this sort of bubble boy approach that sterilization might give it. So this one here, this one's called Light Warrior, it doesn't take that approach. It has mycorrhizal fungi, it has some fertilizers and inoculants in there that help it. But what you need to know about seed starting mix is that I do consider it pretty much mandatory whether you are buying a bagged mix or making your own. And you can make your own seed starting mix by taking a potting soil, like we talked about earlier, and sifting it down. You'd be sifting out some of those larger forest products or bits of rock or stone and giving a nice fine texture to the mix. In fact, we just did a comparison of a bunch of different seed starting mixes that you can check out. We had some pretty interesting results there. But whether you're grabbing this one, Light Warrior, or anything else, just make sure you're using a fine particled mix when you're starting seeds. Now you've got raised bed soil or raised bed mix, which can be confusing even though the name is straightforward. Like, what is the actual difference between a raised bed soil and a potting soil? Because a raised bed is effectively just a very large pot, right? Well, that is the reason why a raised bed mix exists. The particle size in raised bed mixes is slightly chunkier. And what that does is it helps prevent compaction over the years. In some of the raised beds in my front yard, I filled them with almost exclusively potting soil, and some of them I filled with a custom raised bed blend. And lo and behold, the ones with the raised bed blend are doing a lot better right now. This one here is one such bed, and I've got a nice mix on top. It's nice and fine particles. There's some nice perlite in here, etc. But there's also enough larger particles to help prevent compaction over time. What you see happen in some raised beds is eventually that lower section gets really hard and really tough, and plant roots can't penetrate down deep. So if you are growing in raised beds, especially if you're growing like a lot of raised beds like I have here, what I did is I actually got a bulk delivery of soil, but I do recommend getting a raised bed mix and at least cutting it in with a potting soil if you can afford it. I can't tell you how many times over the years people have sent me messages of their cacti and said, help, what am I doing? And it turns out that they've overwatered it, not because they've literally watered it too much, but because they've used a mix that kills the plant because it holds on to too much water. And that's why Cactus Mix, our next selection, exists. It's basically a mix that is specially formulated for cacti and succulents that is designed for maximum drainage. Of course, these are plants that hold on to a lot of water in their own tissues. They need less. They're adapted to desert-like climates where water is few and far between. And so if you want to grow cacti successfully, you pretty much need to either buy or make a cactus mix. And if you do want to make your own cactus mix, it's surprisingly easy. You'll need some sort of standard potting soil, say Happy Frog. You'll take 3 parts of that. You'll mix it with 2 parts of crushed granite and mix that with 2 parts of pumice or perlite, and you have your very own cactus mix. Now we've got citrus mix. This is an Australian finger lime. A mistake a lot of growers use is they think, okay, well, we know citrus wants a little bit of drainage. We know it doesn't like what we call wet feet, so it doesn't want to hold on to a ton of water. I'll just use a cactus mix. And it tends not to work that well. A specially formulated citrus mix tends to have a little bit more wood product in there than it does stone product like cactus mix does. Remember, cactus mix, a little bit more pumice, a little bit more granite type particles in there. Whereas if you were to make your own citrus mix, you would use 5 parts pine bark, fine pine bark. You'd use 1 part potting soil like ocean forest in this case, and you'd use 1 part pumice or perlite. So you can see a lot more wood product in there, but citrus still likes drainage. That's why there's so much of that wood product and that pumice in there to help that water fall through, but it does still need a little more nutrition, of course, because it's providing fruit for you to eat. As you get further and further down the rabbit hole of soil mixes, you get into very specific types of mixes, like acid lovers mix for camellias, azaleas, rhododendrons, blueberries. It's great for those. It's not so much for almost anything else, because those plants like to grow at a soil pH that is so low that almost anything else wouldn't grow. Those are mixes that have a lot of peat in them or a lot of wood product or pine bark, stuff like that, because those are naturally acidic. In fact, most mixes that are just called potting soils will add lime, which raises the pH because they're using those ingredients that are acidic, but they don't want the mix overall to be acidic. So you get into those types of things, then you get into something like an orchid bark, which is used for what are called epiphytic plants, plants that don't grow directly in the soil. They might grow in the crevice of a tropical tree. You get this tropical orchid in there, so it's very, very loose. But what you need to know is buying the soil mix for the use case that you are actually going to do. If you're growing in ground, maybe grabbing garden soil and amending your topsoil with that is a good idea. Otherwise, a potting soil or a raised bed mix is a good choice, and you have to know which type you want based on your unique gardening needs. So there's a lot to know. Hopefully this video has helped. If you want to know how to revitalize old potting soil so you don't keep buying it year after year, check this video out. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.